Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst, Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seattle Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, and I'm here with co-host, Mr. Keith Myers. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Bill.
How are you?
Well, it's morning, so I'm as good as can be, but...
Stuff has not gone wrong yet today because it just hasn't had time to.
Exactly. Also, though, it's morning, so that means it's not as good as it could be because I'm not a morning person.
That's true. And I'm okay because I kind of am. Apparently, I'm finding out on this show that I'm a morning person. I get up, I'm talking. I've only had like 6, 7, 8 sips of coffee yet, not a full glass or mug or anything. I'm already kind of just hyped up, ready to go because I love talking about Seahawks football. I like getting on the show and talking to you because you kind of know what you're talking about. And sometimes I don't. And so it helps to listen to somebody that knows a little bit more about subjects than I do. And I get that. I dig that. That's part of the fun aspect of the show for me. I don't really know why you enjoy talking to me, other than the fact that you get to be the expert and come on and feel good about that.
Nah, give yourself more credit, Bill. It's just fun to get on. We get to talk Seahawks football for an hour and a half, and like, how can that not be fun?
That's
it just
great.
is what it is.
And hopefully other people enjoy the ride too. So this week we are talking about best and worst case scenarios for the 2020 Seattle Seahawks NFL season. What can go right? How right can it go? And how far can we get on the best case scenario? And how deep can the despair be on the very worst case scenario? And maybe a couple of things in between. And we're going to talk about that, spend most of the time on the show going into those details. And then up front, just got a couple of news notes. Wanted to start off with the Greg Olsen signs with Fox Sports. When I first read that, I just read the headline, and I thought, what? Did he leave the team and just decide this whole thing was not going to work, and he's immediately going to get back into the broadcast booth? No, he signed that contract for after he gets done with football, whether it's this year or next year. He's going to be an NFL analyst. Good for Greg. I think he's well suited for that job. He's got a tremendous amount of knowledge, very well-spoken guy. He'll obviously do well in that.
Yeah, I found it interesting, though, that he would sign that now.
I did.
Is that because Fox wanted to lock him up and he was worried that ESPN or someone was going to swoop in and do the same thing? Or is it that he has this suspicion that looking at the tight end room, that once Disley and Colby Parkinson are both cleared to play and healthy, that he might be the odd man out because of his age and, just they know he's a 1-year deal and then gone and the team might move on early. I don't know, but I just found the timing of it to be very interesting.
Yeah, I think all of those things could be true in certain percentages. I think it's likely he signed just a future deal to know that, that's what he's going to do. And he signed a deal with the organization he felt best suited to fit him. And doing that now just made sense in his world. There's a small percentage that, that last scenario you painted probably crept into his mind. It's entirely possible. And yeah, for me, I think it's more of he's choosing the organization, and the organization is choosing him. Because he would certainly, I think, bring something to the table for Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football. Those two broadcasts have struggled a bit, obviously. especially Monday Night Football. And, I think somebody like Greg would be good for that particular broadcast. So, any hootaloo. Quentin Dunbar, dude, like this case just gets deeper and more complicated, and it,
Weirder.
at first glance, when you read the headline, you read the stuff, it's like there's no way that Quentin Dunbar could be a Seahawk anymore. The team has to move on. They've got to come out and make a statement, blah, 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 blah. But the more you really kind of look into it, and the deeper that I looked into it, especially the article that came out from the news organization recently that said that allegedly both Baker and Dunbar are and their key witness in their favor, Johnson, who's the coach that they've known for a long time together, was caught on tape and had some DMs on Instagram and so forth, soliciting a bribe from the witnesses to make sure that they didn't talk or change their story in their favor and so forth, including the implication of Dunbar's attorney, Michael Greco, in the scheme, right? So there's all of that. And that was, when that first came out, man, heads were rolling. The media was basically saying this is a done deal. Everyone's kind of convinced. But for me, when you really read the article, it didn't really completely implicate Dunbar in this scheme. His name really didn't come up except for a late phone call after the whole thing was done from Johnson to Dunbar. And we don't know what that discussion involved. Dunbar's attorney has since left the case, resigned from the case. Dunbar's had previously signed an attorney earlier last week to join the case, and then has another person representing as well at this point. So the other tidbit in that, a later article that came out from Michael Greco in his resignation letter was basically had stated, I want to remove myself from the case so Dunbar can continue to advocate for his innocence. And Dunbar allegedly took and passed a polygraph test confirming he did not participate or witness the robbery. And so for me, things are very messy, obviously, very complicated, but don't completely yet implicate or convict Quentin Dunbar from any wrongdoing at this point. And so for me, it's kind of a wait and see thing. I thought it pointed to a little worse scenario for Baker and his and Dunbar's attorney. So I don't know what to make of this entire thing yet. I don't know that the team probably does either. Quentin Dunbar's obviously come out and professed his innocence, and this thing may end up having to go to trial in order for it to completely wash out, and that could take a while. So I think Dunbar is still on the team, Keith, but there's no guarantees, because the team could elect to move on just based on the fact that it's such a big distraction.
Yeah, I mean, they could. We do know that he was given permission by the judge presiding over the case to travel to Seattle.
That was prior to this news.
True. And be a part of the team workouts and everything. And even if this does continue to proceed towards trial, the trial's not going to be for a while. So it's going to be one of those things where it's like, okay, is the judge going to prevent him from working while they wait for trial? And trial could be months from now. Or is he going to be allowed to, continue
I
with
think
his life?
it really is going to be determined by the state's evidence. I mean, the new attorneys in Dunbar's on Dunbar's team have requested that the state turn over all the evidence that they have, in a reasonable amount of time, which is a normal process. And, and if the prosecuting attorneys have not yet filed charges, and so until that happens, I don't think the league could really do anything. When that happens, I think maybe they could.
Yeah. So it comes down to if no charges are filed by the time the season starts, we're looking at he's going to play, and then any suspension and anything else that'll happen would be a year from now, and he's on the last year of his contract, so he could play this year. and then go into free agency with this hanging over him and that kind of thing. So we'll kind of get a feel for where that goes. But I still expect him to play, and I know that there are people out there, prominent, media people that are calling the Seahawks to just cut ties and move on. There's like, there's just too much crazy here, but I'm not one of them. I think he's going to play. I think there's a lot of gray area and everything that's going on as far as the case, and
I do too. And
I'm not willing to just be like, no, just cut him. And maybe that's wrong on my part, but I don't know. I am willing to, kind of let this ride out and see exactly what
something's
comes from
not quite right, and there is a little bit more evidence against Baker, the other player in this situation. Yep. It seems to me now, if all we have are just reports in the media and stories, and then denials by attorneys and by players and so forth. That's all we have. So we're literally just guessing, but based on everything that's been said and so forth, I don't know. I mean, and the other issue too is that Graco's attorney came out early and has been saying this the entire time, that it's the witnesses that have been trying to extort the players for money, and that this whole scheme is basically reversed. Now, I don't even know how that makes any sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
I don't know how it makes sense given the fact that the evidence, the new evidence that has come out, is reverse of that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We have, the evidence as being described by, reporters at
Correct.
At a place that is not the highest journalistic integrity.
Correct. Absolutely.
We haven't seen the evidence. We have their description of it, and that's all. And it would make sense for in a situation like this where it becomes a cash grab, where come up with allegations, file this stuff, and then be like, "You want this to go away? Pay us."
Yeah. Well, and two, one of the key things that hasn't been disputed yet is that the players waited up to an hour and a half after the alleged robbery to call police. And these things get squirrely. I mean, you're right. When they know who the players were, how much money they're worth, etc., there could be some motive there. You just don't know. And so we'll let it play out. I mean, to me, that's what I think the Seahawks should do. There's no real public relations damage control aspect of this at this point. Unless Dunbar was just flagrantly out there making an ass of himself on this whole situation. He's hiding low. He hasn't really come out and made any public statements. To me, in the new reporting, his name really doesn't come up in that reporting as far as being part of the scheme, other than the fact he received a phone call after this whole episode finished from Johnson, who's the coach guy, his friend, and we don't know exactly what was said there. So that's, to me, there's no further evidence that is bad for Dunbar other than the evidence we already knew in the case.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at all of that, and I'm just like, you know what? We need to let this ride out a little further and see where this goes. We are only a couple of weeks from training camp opening.
I know.
Which is exciting. We have been talking about not football things for a very long time, and I'm ready to talk about.
Well, what do you think of Pete Carroll coming out this last week and saying that he thinks that training camp should be postponed if that's what it means to keep everybody safe?
I don't think he's wrong. I mean, I'm on record here on this show saying if it was up to me, I would say you delay everything and you start training camp in October or November, and you play starting in January, or you push it back a little further and you start training camp in February and you open and play spring football.
Now, I don't want to get too political in this whole situation, but I just don't see things changing from a national leadership aspect of COVID-19 in order for training camp to happen in October or November. Now, maybe I don't see anything happening until well, who knows when, right? To me, it's early next year before there could be policy changes in place in order for things to actually move in a solid direction with any coherent longevity, where things are more stable. Where you could see things being able to have a chance to be open.
Agreed. And so, like, I'm trying really hard to avoid the politics of all of this, but I think what it's going to come down to is the league's going to have to make this decision on their own. They're not going to get any guidance from anywhere else. And if they decide, hey, look, we've just got a lot of
uncertainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty. And there's been cases people are tested when they report to camp, and we have all these players that are testing positive as they arrive, and they go, you know what, we're going to wait this out. And by pushing it back, you go, okay, we're being told that a vaccine is close and may be here by the end of the year or early in next year. Let's go ahead and plan on that. Let's wait and let's do training camp, right before the end of the year or just after the end of the year, and play spring football and do it that way with the hope that vaccine will come.
Well, and there's still uncertainty right now where the league's at, because there are two teams, and I can't remember. I think it's the Jags and somebody else. Maybe it's Arizona Cardinals, where the rookies are able to come into camp on this coming Saturday. And in order for them to come in, there's a testing protocol where every player needs to be tested ahead of time. And then they can come in, but there's no test results that could be available by the time the actual players are supposed to arrive. And the league hasn't come out and said anything. It seems really vague at this point. So,
well, especially
it has postponement written all over it. I know.
In Florida,
it's crazy.
And Arizona. I mean, those are the.
Yeah, we had 4,200 cases reported yesterday and 92 deaths here in Arizona. I mean, this is the hotbed. I hate to say it. I'm embarrassed.
Wait, are you saying
the fact that it's
the desert is a hotbed? Is that the joke you're making here, Bill? Because that.
Yeah, I'm trying not to joke. I really am not trying to joke.
No, I know.
It's just not good. So we're so hopeful on this show, Keith, and we have been for like almost 4 years. We're just that sort of show, and that sort of people, and we're trying to hold out and give people hope and a distraction, and trying to keep this thing alive and going for as long as we can. When it's not, we'll figure it out. But until then, we're just going to keep going. So with that said, let's move into the show. Best and worst case scenarios. So loosely speaking, we're going to outline a couple of best case scenarios, one better than the other, and we're going to outline two worst case scenarios, one the very worst case scenario. And we'll just go through it. We'll have a conversation, and hopefully it turns out well, because I have very few notes, and we're just going to kind of talk this thing through. So I'll do the first one. Best case scenario, number one, Wilson stays healthy. All these things can revolve around Russell Wilson. Probably a little bit of COVID-19 thrown in there as well, but Russell Wilson is the key factor in most of these scenarios, at least for me, Keith. Wilson stays healthy, has an MVP level the whole year, and the whole team does well. And what I mean by that is the offensive line is solid from week one. The wide receivers, Josh Gordon signs. The wide receiver room becomes really healthy. The tight end room, everyone stays healthy and is available throughout the year. The running backs, Carlos Hyde fits in perfectly. The defensive line, we end up having a pass rush. Taylor and Robinson, the rookies, just break out, and they look good and solid. They look like solid players. Blair, Amati, Diggs, Dunbar, that whole thing fits and works out. This could be a Super Bowl team. You get a fast start, the team stays healthy, the young players have impact, and you have a kind of a strong finish. and the team finishes, say, 13-3-ish and has home field advantage, and we get to the big game. To me, that is a possibility with this team. If you really take a look at the schedule and the players, and if everything kind of comes together, which you could say that about any Super Bowl team. So this is not kind of way out there. I'm not just, this is not just a pipe dream. This is actually a possibility for this team. This could happen. Things come together. You could have this scenario happen. I'd give it, a 25% chance, maybe slightly less, but there's definitely a chance that this scenario could play out.
There's a lot of ifs here. And that's always my concern is it possible? Absolutely, because you've got the makings of a team. The skill position.
Name me a team where there's not a lot of ifs.
Kansas City.
Is that the end of the list?
Yes.
So it's a short list, right? Actually, it's a short list, and they're in the AFC.
And San Francisco, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you that. So
you've got a couple, but it is a short list. But there's a difference between having ifs and having a lot of ifs, and that's a lot of ifs because you're asking how likely is each of those items to happen, and then now you need all of them to happen. And
I would say you need at least 85 to 90% of the list I just listed out to happen in order to have a Super Bowl winning franchise. Yeah. I agree. I think that needs to happen every single year for the Super Bowl winner. That all those things need to come together most of the time.
And so you look at all of that and you go, okay, is it possible? Absolutely, because every single one of those things is possible. We're not like just making stuff up, but the fact that we need most of them or all of them to happen in order for that to get through, you're like, okay, well, that tells me that probability states you're not going to get all of them. You're going to get a few of them, which means this team's going to be good. They're going to be contending, but they might fall just short.
Let me ask you this. If you could go through all the different line items that I listed out and tell me in your mind what would need to happen for those things to work out. So if you look at the offensive line, for example, or Josh Gordon signing, or the tight end stay healthy, or the Hyde fit, the defensive line pass rush, if you can kind of break those down a little bit and tell me why they wouldn't go right. Why wouldn't they happen? Because right now all signs point to the fact that most of those things not only are possible, but maybe probable.
I wouldn't bet on the pass rush and the defensive line simply because you're asking two rookies to make major contributions, as well as a second year player and a third year player to both make large steps forward. And so now you're asking four different players all to kind of come in and reach a certain potential. And history tells us that each you just don't get that. Like the Seahawks, for years we talked about Naz Jones, like this is the year he's finally going to step through and do stuff, and he never did. And things like that. Like there was always this expectation, and there's someone that doesn't reach it. And I think that by the time you look at that's where it becomes to get tricky. The same is true for the offensive line. Like we know Dwayne Brown is great when healthy, but he's got to stay healthy. And this team's they're not deep at tackle. So if he doesn't stay healthy, and as an older player with considerable injury struggles the last few years, that to me is going to be a struggle. And then you've got a rookie on the line. You've got a guy who's going to be a full-time starter at center for the first time. There's just those two things are where things get really tricky for me. Josh Gordon signing, I think, is highly probable. And if he doesn't, I'm not sure it's completely... to me, that's not something that has to happen for this team to contend. It just really helps. The tight ends, I think, is a little more shaky just because we don't know where Disley's at and whether he's going to be full-time and healthy and all of that.
And we just talked about Olsen, having a backup plan.
Yeah, and Parkinson broke his foot and won't be ready until around week 1. And so, you've got some of that stuff going on there. But I think overall, I think that there is a lot of highly probable stuff, but it's the two lines that I think really push this and make it difficult to see happening. I would say you said 25%. I was going to say 10 to 15.
Yeah, you're probably more in the ballpark.
But that's 10 to 15% that this stuff goes right and this is a dominant Super Bowl winner. You can be a contender.
Let me ask you this:
Super Bowl team without being a dominant Super Bowl winner.
Now, in any given year, when you really take a look at the probabilities and you look at, say, Las Vegas, there's really not too many teams that have a Super Bowl winning probability line of greater than 10%. Even the Kansas City team is probably at 15 to 20%, right?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to put those percentages in from the way Vegas does their odds, because they're playing this game where they leave everybody low on purpose, because then it's like, hey, look, the Raiders have a 6% chance. That's worth worth a long shot bet on. And so that's how they make their money.
Let's break this down let's break this down just slightly more, and then we'll move on to the next one. If you had to think long and hard about a top 8 teams with the ability to reach the Super Bowl, you've got 4 in the AFC, 4 in the NFC. I think Seattle's right there in a top 4 NFC team, and they've got to win one playoff game, and they would be top 4. Right? And so that's, to me, that's how you look at it. And then you've got essentially 25% odds or greater from that point on. And that's kind of the way I'm approaching this, is like, can we get to the playoffs with the best case scenario?
Absolutely.
Can we win a game? Absolutely. Can we get to the NFC Championship game with the best case scenario being fulfilled? Yes.
Look at where they were. I just say, look at how close they got last year without a working offensive or defensive line, and recognize that there were improvements kind of everywhere. And so you look at that, and if, like I said, Wilson stays healthy, the lines come together, which I think is the biggest piece of all of that. This is a better team than last year, and they were really close. They were a few inches away from having a first round bye and winning the division. And
okay, so that's a perfect jump into the next scenario. It's like it's the best case scenario, but it's a slightly step down. Why don't you kind of go over that?
Well, so here is Wilson stays healthy and plays like he did last year at a near MVP level. I mean, he was the kind of hands-on MVP at the halfway mark, and then he had some down games, and Lamar Jackson just freaking exploded down the stretch and ran away with it. But we know Wilson can play at that level because he did for 8 games last year. If he plays at that level, does it matter what the rest of the team does? Does it matter if the offensive line is great, because he played at that level last year and the offensive line was terrible? Does it matter?
So if everything being equal, like all the other positions on the team are slightly better than they were last year, and Wilson has the same year, is their floor still 11 wins?
Doesn't it have to be?
In this scenario,
if Wilson plays at that high of a level, even if the other things don't happen, even if the pass rush isn't improved, even if the offensive line isn't improved, show me where this team, how this team loses games when you've got your quarterback playing at that high of a level. Because he pulled out wins last year that this team didn't deserve elsewhere. I mean, the rest of the team didn't play at a level good enough to win, but Wilson did. And he's that good that he can take a team that's not particularly great and run them up and turn them into a playoff team. And I think we saw that a year ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certain things have to go wrong in order for your team not to get to its fullest potential. I think that happened last year. You take a look at a single player like Will Disley going down. Now, you don't think Will Disley is really important because he just hasn't played that many games over the last couple of years, but he's on a trajectory to really start to affect games. The touchdown production alone in the red zone for Disley is amazing. And so you take a guy like that out, that's cost you a win. To me, you take a look at situations where you struggled a little bit with injury, like Justin Britt at center. You have Joey Hunt in there. That probably ended up costing you a game because Joey Hunt got beat so badly a few times and got to the quarterback, killed some drives. You just never know how those things turn out. If the team is going to be average this year, and Wilson's amazing again, so you might have Penny and Disley, maybe Parkinson starting on the PUP list. Maybe you have Carson has fumble issues again. You're setting the ball down on the turf. You're giving the other team an opportunity. Those are drive killers. Those are game killers. The pass rush continues to struggle. Maybe in the first half of the year, maybe in the second half of the year, it comes on. The team gets healthy, finishes strong, gets back to 11-5. The whole thing looks a lot like 2019 in this scenario. So do we go back and do we question the front office as to why they didn't further address the defensive line and all those sorts of things? I mean, at 11-5, you're probably not going to the Super Bowl. You could if you finish strong and get healthy at the end, but your team still has some glaring weaknesses in spots. 11-5 is nothing to be shameful about, but based on the fact that your expectation level this year with a Super Bowl window open with Russell Wilson as your quarterback, you want to be able to get to the Super Bowl. This is a slight step back from that. Are we still, as a fan base, is this still an acceptable outcome?
Yeah, at some point they do need to look at the fact that, this is Russell Wilson's prime. This is when the window is the widest open, and they need to be doing what they can as a franchise to be getting championships, to be getting rings during this opportunity. Because once Wilson starts to decline, and is no longer the thing that's keeping this team winning, the window really closes, and we don't know when it will reopen because it was open for it was open for a couple of years during the Mike Holmgren era. And they never got there. And
as long as you have let's say this, as long as you have a quarterback that's as in the best Hasselbeck years, and Hasselbeck in his best 2 or 3 years was a top 10 quarterback. He wasn't a top 5 quarterback, but he was a top 10 quarterback, and that showed you could get to the game, with that level of quarterback play. If I can't even imagine Russell Wilson at that level for another 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. So I think the window is open, for the next half decade at least. And you're right. The team needs to do everything in its power in order to get there. That's why it's perplexing a little bit, the defensive line situation this year. I think everything else combined is definitely a Super Bowl winning team. And if that defensive line can somehow come together, we got a really good shot. But I would have thought that they would have tried just a little bit harder to get one more key cog into that situation. But we'll see. That the offseason isn't over yet.
I would have liked to see. They still need a defensive tackle. Even right now,
I agree.
They need a defensive tackle. But right. I would have loved to see them, get a big time offensive lineman, someone that they could plug in at right tackle and know that you've got a great player there, and not a serviceable player, which is what they did, or something like that, or to go get Clowney and bring him back.
Based on the entirety of the offseason so far, which is most of it, how likely is it that we're just an 11-5 team again, and 2019 essentially repeats?
I think that this is probably the most likely scenario, because I do believe that This is Russell Wilson's prime. He is not going to, barring injury, he is not going to be taking a major step back. He's not going to be the reason why this team starts to lose games. He's going to will this team to some wins that they wouldn't otherwise get. And
I agree with that totally.
And
he alone is, what is the floor win wise for the team just based on Russell Wilson?
Probably 9.
I know.
Because go back to
a couple of years ago when we did the rebuild.
Yeah, I mean that.
I thought we were going to be 7 wins. I mean, I came out in the prediction show and said 7 wins because I just couldn't see how we could do any better than that. And Russell Wilson proved me wrong for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the first year of the rebuild when they jettisoned a bunch of talent like Richard Sherman,
2017,
going to be he's a Hall of Famer, and they lost Cam and they cut Michael or traded Michael Bennett, and they just lost all this talent. And we thought, wow, this team's taken this huge step back. They're going to be 7 or 8 wins, and they went 10-6 and made the playoffs, right. And we were like, whoa. I think the year before when they went 9-7. Before they jettisoned all that stuff, when there was all the internal strife going on and just all these other problems within the team, I think that was probably the floor of a Russell Wilson team.
Yeah, because you can essentially surround him with, average talent, which we had at that time, and we still eked out 9-10 wins. Mm-hmm. I think that's the floor. So that being said, I mean, we bumped up that talent level this year. We infused the team with quite a bit more in a couple of key areas: defensive back, linebacker, the offensive line. You could argue is just a little better, not discernibly better, but just a little better. And then the receivers are stepping up. Metcalf is in his second year, et cetera, plus the tight end group. Then you've got Carlos Hyde coming in, which is, I think, really a solid underrated signing to me.
Plus, if Quentin Dunbar plays, and you have Quandre Diggs for the full year,
right,
at the secondary, I mean that those two things right there could be a massive upgrade in the secondary. I mean that really helps. Defensively.
Yeah, so to me, that's why this team floor is 11-5. I mean, just based on those things alone, logic would tell you that it's no worse than 2019.
Yeah,
with a lot of potential, a lot of upside to get further. And I think that's the thing is like we all want to get a little further, and I think the defensive line is slightly underrated, and we'll prove that out over the course of the year. Now, it may not happen until the second half, where everything kind of just comes together, but that remains to be seen. All right, Keith.
So you said that that's kind of the floor. Well, that's not really the floor. There is
true.
There is the floor that we don't want to think about. We don't want to talk about. Nobody wants to admit. We all just kind of zone it out and be like, that doesn't exist. It's not possible.
So is this, so let me ask you this, we're going to talk about Russell Wilson. This is being set up because we're going to talk about Russell Wilson.
Yeah, it is.
How many seasons has Russell Wilson played? This is his 9th season or 9th season this year. So 8 straight seasons, we haven't even had to have this conversation. And I'll be damned if we're having this conversation, Keith, and it scares the crap out of me. So I'm going to knock on wood right now. Everything that we're talking about is complete fiction and will not happen. I guarantee it. But we're going to talk about it just because it's fun, and it's people go to horror movies too, not because it's going to happen, because they want to be entertained.
That's true. I'm like, there's nothing fun about watching a Seahawks team go into this season expecting Russell Wilson to be quarterback, and then to see him get hurt. But you're right. People do go to horror movies. Sometimes we like to be scared. So let's go ahead and discuss what this looks like, because we can take the 2 different scenarios that we just had, which are one, when the defense and offensive line and everything really comes together, but they don't have Russell Wilson because he gets hurt. Or what's the real floor, which is those things don't happen and Russell Wilson gets hurt. because those two things are very unlike. I mean, we're talking about a quarterback in Wilson that's only missed a few snaps.
Yeah.
In 8 years.
Right. Well, for me, the first worst case scenario, which is not the worst, it's the second worst case scenario, is the team starts fine. COVID-19 doesn't play a factor yet at this point. The season starts. Maybe they've got a promising start. Everything seems like it's coming together, but Wilson gets injured and is out for the season midway through the year. That would be a worst case scenario. The wheels, are solid. The car's moving down the road. All of a sudden, the wheels come off. What happens? I think that the team ends up having a weak finish after a promising start. Other players that are injured, the team elects to shut those guys down. Young players play, and we start to lose games. Now, there's a hidden upside there: is the young players are playing, they get experience, but the team goes, say, 8-8 or less. With Geno Smith. And if you take a look at Geno Smith's career averages, since we're going to begin to talk about backup quarterbacks now for the first time ever, Geno Smith comes in with career average of having 8-8 record in 2013, a 4-12 record in 2014, or the two primary years that he started as quarterback. He had 523 completions out of 906 attempts for 6,000 yards, a 6.8 average, which is considerably below Russell Wilson's, 29 TDs, 36 interceptions, a 72.7 quarterback rating. He also added 20 fumbles in 2 years to that scenario. 57.7% completion percentage, which is about 10 points below Russell Wilson. So you're talking about a quarterback, even in his best ability, and Geno Smith's a fine person and a good solid backup for the team, given the fact that Russell Wilson has no injury history. But, shit can happen. Geno comes in, and I think the best we can hope for with Geno Smith is 500 ball, maybe less with this team.
So here, what I want to look at that, and I want to ask, we can look at those stats, and those stats are really unimpressive. But he was also playing for a Jets team that was terrible.
Absolutely.
I mean, that Jets team was awful, and not only were they awful, but he wasn't even the guy that the Jets really wanted. He was thought of as a first-round quarterback. The Jets passed on him, but then he dropped. And in the second round, they basically felt compelled to take him because he was thought of as the best quarterback there. And he dropped to them, and basically Idzik and company were saying, if we don't take a quarterback here and we go into the year without one, even with having him drop all the way that he did, we'll get fired. We're done. And so they, that was kind of, they took him, they didn't build around him, they didn't build the team for him, and he played on a really bad team. And I look at, his rookie year, they went 8-8, but he had 5 game-winning drives in the fourth quarter. And that was kind of impressive. I mean, he took 43 sacks. That hurts. His completion percentage was 55.8. That's not good enough. 12 TDs and 12 TDs and 21 interception. That isn't good enough. But that's also playing on a really bad team. And he's not going to be playing on a really bad team in Seattle. He's going to be playing on, at worst, an okay team in Seattle. So I think we can see better than those. And you look at his career progression, his completion percentage got better, went from 55.8 to 59.7, which is right at 60, kind of the minimum for a starting quarterback in the NFL. In 2015, it was 64.3. Now, granted, that's a smaller sample because he only started one game that year. But it shows improvement. it shows progression. He hasn't played much in the 3 years since then, or 4 years since then, because last year also he didn't even though he was on the team, he didn't have any stats because he never played. But that kind of progression gets in the. He's been here. He's been with the offense. He's got Schottenheimer, who's one of the better quarterback coaches in the league.
He's probably a heck of a lot more confident now as a player in this system. Yeah.
And so I could see, I don't think that he is a guy that you just expect to be bad because he's a backup.
But I also don't expect him to come in and cause a quarterback controversy in 2021 if he comes in.
No, not at all.
Right.
This isn't a full scenario like they had in Philly. This is a guy that he'll come in, he'll be serviceable.
He'll hold down the fort.
Yeah, and if it's Wilson's going to be out for 2 or 3 weeks because of an ankle that he just can't play through, he'll hold down the fort. Wilson will come back and lead the team, into the playoffs. If this is a Wilson's out for the year and Smith is going to play, now you've got an okay player on an okay team, and if we talked about scenarios. If the defense comes together like we talked about, the offensive line plays well. We know the skill positions are set. They could get to 9 wins, I think. If
you're realistic though, and if you take a look, say the first half of the year we went 6-2. In the second half of the year, they would face the Rams, the Cardinals, the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets, the Redskins. For now, Redskins. The Rams and the 49ers, I could see them having 3 wins in the second half of the season and go 9 wins and 7. Maybe make the playoffs, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, if you have Russell Wilson for half the year and then you have to drop Geno in there, I still think this is a playoff team. It's going to be tight. They're going to be the 6th seed, but they're close. But that's in that scenario where the defense and offensive line and those things come together. This is the best case scenario that we talked about earlier, minus Russell Wilson. And then it's a matter of how much Wilson did you get? If you got him for half a year, I think into that situation, this is a playoff team. They're probably one and done. I can't see them going in and winning a road playoff game with Geno, but they're still a playoff team. If Wilson goes down before the year starts, but those other things happen, right? So the defense is significantly improved, the offensive line significantly improved, all of that. Geno led a bad Jets team to an 8-8 record. I have a hard time seeing that he can't lead a good Seahawks team to something better.
So you're saying even if Russell Wilson misses the year, if everything else goes right, this could still be a 8 to 10 win team.
I would say 8 to 9 would be. I have a hard time seeing Geno as a 10-win quarterback, given the Rams and I don't know the Rams, but the 49ers, maybe Arizona, if they take the step that everyone expects, being on their schedule. There's some tough teams. I don't think this isn't a really easy or a really hard schedule, but there's enough tough teams on there that I could see them losing some, and I could see them losing a game or two that they shouldn't because they don't have their star quarterback in there, and settling into that kind of 9 win slot.
To me,
everything else goes right.
Yeah, to me, I think that once one big, huge thing, Russell Wilson, goes wrong, a lot of different things could probably go wrong as well. Just from a team psychology standpoint alone, it would be really difficult to overcome that, since it's never happened before and how important Russell Wilson is to this team. Now, the coach obviously could lead them through adversity and so forth, and I have every reason to believe that the team wouldn't give up on itself. But other things could happen. Other choices could be made in order, for this thing to really go bad. Let's just say Wilson gets, this is our worst case scenario. At least it is for me. Worst case scenario. Wilson gets hurt before the season starts. He's out for the year. Okay. Say Penny, Disley, Parkinson, and a Bobby Wagner start the season on the pup. Wagner pulls a hamstring. He's had those before. They shut him down out of precaution. Let's say COVID-19 comes into play just a little bit. The team has 7 players over a course of 2 or 3 weeks test positive and have to go into quarantine. They bring in practice squad guys because there's no picking off other players from other teams at this point. It's just too late. There's too much uncertainty about COVID. You've got to, one of the NFL rules is you've got to stick within your own organization in order to bring players in. Let's say they have a slow start, which is entirely possible with the schedule.
Well, with all of those things happening right there, you don't even need to say they have a slow start. They will have a slow start.
Well, let's just say they drop their first 5 games before the bye week, so they're literally 0-5 heading into the bye week. They drop Atlanta, New England. Now with Cam Chancellor, Dallas, Miami's not going to be improved. Cam Newton, sorry. Miami's going to be an improved team. You got the Minnesota Vikings. You could easily drop those games, even with it not being so dire, without Russell Wilson. And then after the bye, you've got Arizona, which is coming on, the 49ers, Buffalo, which is underrated. The Rams are still not a bad team. The Cardinals, I think you could beat you've got the Philadelphia Eagles, sorry. Then the Giants, Jets, and Redskins back to back to back. You could theoretically win those games, and then the Rams, 49ers. What I'm saying is this could be a 3-win team, worst case scenario. And if is the case, you're almost in a situation where you're kind of like the 49ers were year before last. Everything's going wrong. Your quarterback got hurt for the year. He's out. The wheels come off. They're picking in the top 3 in the draft. And the very next year you've got Russell Wilson back and your whole team's kind of back and you're still a Super Bowl contender, but you've got a really nice high draft pick in every round. Which Seattle hasn't had for a long time. So the worst case scenario,
a top 3 overall pick defensive lineman, whether it be dominant defensive tackle or a clowning like defensive end who's 22 and healthy.
or a premier left tackle, to replace Dwayne Brown. So the worst case scenario could actually have a silver lining, is what I'm saying. So even if it's really bad, it could end up turning around and being and there could be a big huge asterisk on this season anyway. 2020, the worst case scenario is the 2020 league year is canceled because of COVID-19 and so forth. So maybe you do have an asterisk on this thing, and that you shut the whole thing down. Wilson's out, and you go for the draft pick. I don't know. I hate doing that as a fan and as an organization, but maybe it makes sense.
Well, the thing is that they won't. If Wilson goes down, they will do what they can to win. They're not. This isn't a team.
Pete Carroll is not going to lay down for anybody.
Pete Carroll, no matter what the situation, is not going to tank. It's not going to happen. Look at what happened in his first year in 2010, where they literally cut everyone who had a cuttable contract.
235 roster transactions.
Yeah, and I mean, like TJ Houshmandzadeh, who the year before they'd signed that massive contract to, they actually they had more of a cap hit to cut him than the cap savings was created. So basically, it cost them more in cap room to not have him play because of all the guaranteed money that was still left. But they did that to get out from underneath, what they considered a bad contract, and they went 7-9. Yeah. They won the division at 7-9, and then went into a playoff game, and we had the beast mode. So that's the beast mode game
with the Super Bowl contending team.
Was Super Bowl defending champion.
Yes.
And won a playoff game and really pushed their draft order way down. I mean, if there was ever a year for them to tank, it was that year. I mean, you had you knew you weren't going to be that competitive. And for most of the games in that year, they weren't competitive. They just got crushed in a bunch of games. And,
he remade the image of that team into his own. He should have won Coach of the Year that year. That was the most amazing turnaround of a franchise I've ever seen, from a 7-win team to a 7-win team. Essentially the same team, right?
Oh no, they were a 4-win
team.
Jim Mora.
Right.
And then they went to a 7-win team. And you're thinking like, okay, that's a 3-win improvement. That's pretty good, but not like,
right.
Not like.
But it set the stage for everything else.
Yeah. He didn't win Coach of the Year that year because it was 7 wins, and I think if it had been 9, he would have. Just because they tend to lean on, you have to have a winning record and that kind of stuff. The year that I can't believe he didn't win it was 2012. That's the year where he started the rookie quarterback who struggled in his first few games, and they went with Brandon Browner, who, God, he got crushed in his first few games, and they just weathered the storm and waited it out. And all those things started to come together. That was a very good way to put that. And once those things started to come together and the team really meshed, then they went. Yeah,
after the Chicago game at Chicago, that thing started to come together.
Yeah, and then they, they hung that 50 burger on Buffalo, and then another one on Arizona, and it was like,
oh man, that 3-game stretch right there was unreal.
Yeah, and you're like, whoa, okay, this team is legit. And this is coming from a team that had won 7 wins the year before. And that was one of the best coaching jobs I've ever seen. Just straight up. It's one of the best coaching jobs I've ever seen.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for that slow start in Atlanta in the playoffs, and they'd gone and won that game, which they almost did. They almost came back and won that.
Well, yeah, they did. They had the lead with 36 seconds left, and then the defense gave it up.
Right.
But they were so close to winning that playoff game.
And who knows what happens after that, right?
And it really comes down to, if Chris Clemens hadn't blown out his knee on that sand in Washington that they painted green, this is a team that would have they would have won that game. I mean,
that was the same game that ruined Robert Griffin III's career as well.
Yep.
All right, so bring it back into this year, the worst case scenario. So
what were we talking about again?
Exactly.
The show wasn't about 2012. Wait.
Yeah. If
hold on, let me check my notes
if COVID cancels the entire season, we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about team history. Yeah. So getting back to this year, so the wheels come off. Worst case scenario, team obviously is not trying to tank, but it just happens organically that the team is just not good. And what is your worst case scenario? I kind of painted mine.
My worst case scenario.
Can you see them getting to 3 wins, or do you think it's their floor? Even the worst possible case floor is like 6 or 7.
So as far as wins, I think 3, because you're talking about the defense completely falling apart. The defensive line just never does anything, and you don't have Wilson, and the offensive line's bad, so you can't get the running game going. You can't even give Geno Smith a spare second, and so he's throwing interceptions like crazy. Yeah, I could see this being a 3-win team. To me, that's not the worst case scenario, though. The worst case scenario here is that this is a team that has all these things go wrong, but they win a couple games early. They win a couple games in the middle. They finished the year at 6 wins, but they saw themselves, we're hanging close to 500. Maybe we can string stuff together. And they continue to fight, and they don't play Marquise Blair at safety. They leave McDougald in, and they don't play, Damian Lewis at right guard. They roll with some veteran, and they try and hold on, hoping that they can put string some wins together down the stretch and sneak into the playoffs. And they don't set themselves up for the future, even though they have a 6-win team, because they didn't get a high draft pick. They got, maybe top
15, right?
Top 10, somewhere in there, like 10 to 11, 12. But they didn't go and get a number 3 pick. But they also didn't prep a bunch of their young players. They didn't get them in there, get them experience, and get them developed. They roll with Bobby, KJ, and Irvin at linebacker, and don't get Barton and Brooks a tremendous amount of playing time. Like, that is the worst case scenario, because that is, not only was the team bad and just not worth anything, but they didn't get anything out of being bad. If they recognize they're going to be bad when Wilson goes down, and then they lose their first 3 or 4 with Smith, and they go, okay, you know what? Let's.
At what point do you play Anthony Gordon? Does he ever become a factor in this scenario?
Yeah, he's got to, because he's going to be your backup at that point. And if they're not winning with Geno, go see what you've got in Gordon. He probably is not going to. He may not miss you and win you some games, but he at least will get some playing time. You'll get to see what you have. You can see how he reacts within the offense, what he can do, and get an idea if you can have a cheap option at backup quarterback next year and not pay Geno.
And maybe you could get enough on tape where you could create a Anthony Gordon hype video and get a draft pick out of him at some point.
Yeah, I think to do that, he'd have to win a few games and look.
I agree, but that's not completely out of the question. I mean, look at the receiver, look at the tools that a guy like Anthony Gordon would have. Now, this worst case scenario doesn't necessarily mean everything falls apart. You've still got a nice wide receiver group. You've got a nice tight end room. You've got a couple of legit running backs. The offensive line looks to be solid. I don't know that the offense would necessarily kill you if a guy like Anthony Gordon was quarterback. Now, the mistakes would be made, interceptions would happen, but
and that's the problem is the defense isn't good enough for the offense to have a bunch of turnovers.
That right there.
And when you start playing Geno and Gordon at quarterback, you're looking at a team that's going to have too many turnovers to overcome all of that. I think they're going to they'd put up some stats, and the defense is going to give up points, and the offense, especially if the offense turns the ball over, that's going to make it really hard. And they're going to be throwing to come back into games, and so you might actually get some really exciting games where the team, loses 23-28. Type of thing, where they're throwing the ball all over the field down the stretch because they have to, because they're way behind. It could be a fun losing year in terms of watching them, do some of that stuff. But
how would a season without Russell Wilson dictate the future at the quarterback position for the Seattle Seahawks?
I think what it would do is it would show them. It would show them a little bit that you can't put everything on Wilson, right? Because that's essentially what they've done the last few years, is by just scrapping an offensive line and not trying. They'll say they tried, but they also hired Tom Cable. But by just scrapping the offensive line and asking him to be the offense and run around and buy time that most quarterbacks would get killed under the pressure that he's been under. But that's not going to work, because you're dependent entirely on Wilson for any kind of success. And they're going to be forced to go, okay, we have to have more in place so that way we can survive without him. And so I
what
think
if the play that Wilson got hurt on was directly caused by a bad offensive line call or whatever, and a certain offensive lineman got beat and it led to Wilson being hurt? Would it also affect the way that the offensive line is put together in the future?
No, this is what I'm saying. I think that it would, they're going to be forced in a situation where Wilson gets hurt and they see just how bad it is without him. They're going to be like, okay, we've got to not have that happen. And they finally start getting him the protection that he needed from the beginning.
Where does that come from as far as deleting some of the talent at other position areas on the team? Like, there's only so much cap to go around. Mm-hmm. How do you actually address the offensive line, maybe a backup quarterback situation, without having it detrimentally affect other areas of the team?
You can't. It's a zero-sum game. If you add somewhere, you got to subtract elsewhere, unless you just draft really, really well, and so you've got all that talent there. But what I see is, you would see Dwayne Brown and his money being used on a younger player that's going to be healthier. You're going to see KJ Wright gone and his job turned over to Cody Barton. You might see Bobby Wagner gone and his job turned over to Jordan Brooks. You're going to see the team go young.
Bradley McDougald would be gone. Blair would be in,
Blair would be the guy. So they would go young on.
They would turn into defense. 2011 Seattle Seahawks again, basically. They would play young players.
Yeah. Or 2011, 2012. The young guys would have to play, so that way they could pay good players on the offensive line to protect Wilson. And you improve in one area and you lose in another. I think that you would also be forced to make.
I think this is going to happen down the road anyway, just because Wilson, even if he remains healthy, will continue to lose a step, and they'll need to up that protection ante.
Yep.
Anyway.
He will age, and at that there has to be a point where this team transitions into more of an offensive team around Wilson. This idea that they're trying to remain a defense-oriented team and let Wilson be the offense because he's good enough to do it, works to an extent as long as the defense is good, which we saw last year it wasn't, so they weren't a true contender. And as long as Wilson can continue to do that for you, but a less athletic Wilson as he ages means he's not going to be able to.
He's going to be a pure pocket passer at some point.
Well, I wouldn't know if he's ever going to be a pure pocket passer, but he's going to be more of a pocket passer.
So let me ask you this: what kind of external pressure or internal pressure will come upon the current administration, i.e., Pete Carroll and company, to be gone and a new regime come in? What kind of a worst case scenario would put that amount of pressure on a team to make that big of a change?
I don't know. I know people call for it all the time because they don't.
True.
They don't like Wilson, or they don't. Yeah, they don't like them wasting Wilson's years with a defensive team and all of that. But
quote unquote, they're not wasting it. Don't buy into that.
But I'm
not you, but other people.
No, but like I said, people have been calling for that for a couple of years now, and I don't see it. You win 11 games and
Wilson's in an MVP year. I mean, give me a break. Wilson can't be in an MVP conversation if you're not utilizing him in an effective way.
Yeah,
those two things can't be true.
And so I look at this and I'd say if there was a 3-win team next year because of our worst case scenario, and then they come around the following year and they're like a 5 or a 6-win team, I could see it changing at that point. But if they have a 3-win year next year, and it's just this miserable experience for Pete Carroll, he's the oldest coach in the league, and he's the oldest coach in the league by a few years.
You never know how that affects somebody.
Maybe he retires. Maybe he goes, you know what? I'm going to step down as head coach and just do the, team president, overseeing stuff. We're going to bring in, a new younger staff, a new vision, blah, blah, blah. Dan Quinn gets let go in Atlanta, and they go, okay, let's bring him back as a defensive coordinator, and they go get a young offensive guru to be the head coach. And
I think he's already on the team. I honestly do. I don't. Everyone's going to hate this, but I think Brian Schottenheimer is being set up to be the eventual head coach of the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh God, you're going to make me sick.
I'm sorry. I do. It's just it's the nature of the way this thing goes, because he's there. He's got Russell Wilson's trust and confidence. Especially if you bring in a guy like Quinn to be D coordinator, and not head coach, for team stability and continuity, you would seriously be having Brian Schottenheimer on the short list, and it wouldn't shock me if he would be the coach.
See, yes, I mean, I could see that. I would hope that there would be a mandate that he's got to go get someone interesting to be his offensive coordinator, because his offense is not interesting. There's just literally nothing.
Well, sure, it's not interesting, but is it effective? Is it effective with the right talent? It's a top 10 offense. It might not be exciting, but it's a top 10 offense. It could be top 5.
What offense would not be a top 10 offense with Russell Wilson?
Well, I mean, it could definitely look completely different. So you could have an offense that looks a lot like Kansas City's in Seattle, and Russell Wilson would be a stat monster, but would they win any more games?
But that's what I'm saying is you're basing it on, it's a top 10 offense. What's the floor? Give me a scheme with Russell Wilson as the quarterback where it's not a top 10 offense.
Well, the key factor there is they're asking Russell Wilson to play hero ball in almost every game because it's designed to be close. The scores are designed to be close. We're within a 3 points or 7 points at the most of winning every football game. That's the design. And so until it gets away from that, we'll never know the true potential upside of a more dynamic offense, but you're right. The floor is probably top 10.
The floor might be what we see out of Brian Schottenheimer's offense.
And we will never know.
And we will never know. But I have a hard time believing that you bring in a Kansas City style offense and, or even what the Texans run with their outside zone scheme and the way they do things. Wilson's going to he'll have monster stats, and they'll go from being a top 10 offense to being a top 4, top 3 offense. How does that make them worse? I don't see how it does.
Are those young quarterback offenses, and could they work with Russell Wilson now at this point in his career?
Yes. Yeah, they can.
So you're willing to put Russell Wilson out on an island more so than he has been in order to give the read zone, run option type look, and put him out there for rushing 500 yards a season at this point in his career?
Here's the thing: is I'm not talking about a Lamar Jackson offense. I'm talking
about but Patrick Mahomes rushes for 400, 500 yards as well, and so does Watson.
Yeah, but a lot of that, it's not designed runs, it's scrambling. And Wilson does the same thing. And when you're talking
that's true.
When you're talking about when you're talking about putting your quarterback on an island, they're putting Russell Wilson on an island in the pocket because the offensive line's so bad. And I just don't see, I don't see, give him an opportunity to be more dynamic in terms of what he's doing, give him more options, but really put the ball in his hands and let him do the stuff he needs to do. And I think that you're going to end up. And
Pete Carroll, I think, would argue that they're doing that.
Oh, but they're not. They really aren't. They're asking him to turn around and hand the ball off.
Does running the ball and being a top 4 or 5 rushing team bother you?
No, not at all. But are they a top 4 or 5 rushing team?
Statistically, stats would say yes.
I don't think they are.
Rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. They're in there in all those categories.
Well, see, that's the thing is you're going to go with attempts.
It's when you run. I understand the dynamics differences and so forth, but what I'm saying is, does it make Russell Wilson worse to be in this offense? He's already an MVP candidate. He gets plenty of attempts. His downfield throws, he the way that they set that up, the running plus the over the top throws and so forth, is a pretty effective way to have an offense if it works, if the talent is there. I'm saying it might not be dynamic and completely, amazing stat wise, but it gets the job done.
Again, I think you're still seeing the floor of what this offense could be. You're saying, yeah, it gets the job done. Imagine playing games in which instead of scraping out a win down, right at the end of the game, asking Wilson to play hero ball, you actually attempted to score points in the first half and you win by 11.
And we have these conversations every week during the year. I know, I get it, dude. I'm right there with you. I'm just posing these questions because I think it's important to have this conversation, even though it's getting sideways a little bit on our topic, but nonetheless.
Wait, we had a topic?
I don't even remember. But
I don't know.
It doesn't matter. We've lost everybody. It's just you and I sitting in the room now. There's nobody here with us. All right. So we went through it. We got the best case and the worst case. So percentage-wise,
the best case is they are a true Super Bowl like team.
They're one of 8 teams that could get to the Super Bowl and win it. That's just a fact right now on the ground.
Yeah. And like I said, and in a best case scenario where the defense really comes together with all of the new pass rushers and linebackers and just at all 3 levels, this is you're like one of 8 teams that could get there. I'm like, they may be one of 4 teams that could get there and win it if all those things come together.
If all those things come together, yep.
And the offensive line gels and is good. So that's the best case. The worst case scenario is no Wilson and the wheels fall off, and this is a 3-win team. So
what's the percentage on that? So that you had 10% on the first best case. What's the worst case percentage?
Probably like 2 or 3%. It just requires so many things to go wrong.
Yeah, I would say it's less than 5% for sure, because
including the Russell Wilson injury before the year.
Right.
So, yeah, and it requires so many things to go wrong, and it's not like
I think that
I would say in the best case scenario, you're asking for things to go right that on paper have potential to go right. You know what I mean?
Individually, all those things have the potential, more potential to be right than wrong.
Yep. The worst case scenario is you take the team and you look at what are the strengths of the team, like the quarterback play, and you just remove them from the roster. And you brought up, what if Bobby Wagner gets hurt? And you take the strength of the team, that all pro player, and you just remove them from the roster. And you turn what should be a strength going into a massive weakness. And there's no reason to expect that to happen other than injury. But even if that happens with Bobby Wagner, you've got Jordan Brooks and Cody Barton sitting there ready. Well,
that's the upside. I mean, you could have some young guys get some serious experience and come into the year the next year with a healthy Russell Wilson and kill it in the draft, and you could end up being even better. So, out of all this, what I got is that it's likely that we're about the same that we were in 2019, when it's all said and done. Now, with a slight uptick potential. So you could have possibly a couple more wins, get to 13, win the division, home field advantage. You're giving yourself the best chance you can to get into the Super Bowl. That's really, I mean, the difference between 11 and 13 is pretty substantial when you really think about it. You go from a wild card team to a home field advantage team in the playoffs. That's huge. And so it just takes a few things to work to get to that point.
If this team is, I don't want to say significantly better, but slightly better, they beat San Francisco in that last game. They were only a foot away from beating them anyway. And you win that one. Well,
San Francisco came into that game 9-0. So they were 9-0 when they faced the Seahawks. The Seahawks only had 2 losses in that game, so we came in 7-2. So there really isn't that much difference between those two teams, although San Francisco throughout the year was just considered the best of the best of the best. But Seattle wasn't even in that conversation, so the differences are just minor. I think we just get there a little bit. Even though on paper I think San Francisco has a more talented team, we may be deeper and overall because of that better.
And we have the significantly better quarterback. And that means
that's a huge factor.
That means more in the NFL than anything. And ultimately, I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, you have the Seahawks have Russell Wilson, the 49ers have Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's not to say that Garoppolo is bad, but he isn't at this point in his career a dynamic guy who will go win you games. That's just not who he is. And
he's more of a Kirk Cousins level kind of player.
Yeah.
He's going to get you wins. He's going to he's not going to carry your team to glory, but he's going to hold down the fort and make sure you don't lose games because of that play.
Yeah, he's not going to lose you a bunch of games. But you're not going to win games entirely because he played hero ball and willed out a win the way Russell Wilson does on the regular. And that's just they're different players. Now, that doesn't mean Garoppolo won't develop into that as he continues to improve. I mean, look at what Matt Hasselbeck did. He was kind of more of a game manager type at first. And then, in 2015, 2016, 2017, he had 3 years where he was legit, very, very good quarterback. And then his back injuries caught up to
years?
him. And I think it was, not as terrible, 2005, 6, and 7.
There you go.
15, 16, and 17. There's a 10-year,
Well, Mike Holmgren, too, was an excellent quarterback coach for Matt Hasselbeck.
Mm-hmm. That was a good fit.
So let's wrap this thing up. For those of you still with us, make sure you definitely come back next week. We're going to have special guest Dana O'Gorman join us for a look around the NFL. We're just going to have an open conversation about literally any topic, everything related to the team, related to the division, related to other NFL stories that are out there. And we'll just take a look around and get you ready for training camp week. As of now, training camp is still on schedule. We're still planning on recording. I think it's July 28th would be the next time we record, which is Tuesday, the training camp preview show. So make sure you join us for the next 2. And then from there, hopefully we'll be talking about all sorts of stuff we're seeing out on the practice field and eventually out in the regular season. So anything else? Any final thoughts, Keith?
Yeah, just when guys report, please don't report with positive COVID tests. Everyone come in healthy. That's what I want, because we are in a situation where the rookies are going to be arriving soon. They're going to arrive. There's 48-hour quarantine and testing, and hopefully they.
God, this is just crazy.
Yeah, if they come in without everybody testing negative and get ready to go. We can.
Isn't it crazy? If you take a look at 50 teams over 32 cities, not 50 teams, 32 teams over 32 different cities, and they're all under, most of the NFL's under the age of 35, 32. You're asking a bunch of young guys to come in, plus coaches, personnel, front offices, to all get together and be COVID free. Mm-hmm. Is unreal, dude.
32 teams and probably 250 people per team.
Jeez. Wow. Thousands of people need to be COVID.
Yeah. Because it's 90 players per team. And then you think about all the coaches, training staff, the people who keep the front office staff, the people who keep the buildings and those things.
Referees that come in and help.
Yeah. And it's just the number of people that are involved there's just a lot. Like I said, about 250 people per team. And that's a lot of people. And that's a
logistical nightmare. It just is. It's a logistical nightmare in a regular year. It just, they have coordinators that coordinate all that stuff, Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's hope for the best. Let's continue to be hopeful. So until next week, follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of your shows, and go out and subscribe to the show. We've also got a YouTube channel now. You can listen to the show on YouTube, although we don't have a live show on there at this point. Maybe we'll get to there at some point. But for now, that's another venue that you can listen to the show. So until next week, Keith, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. The show is at Hawks Playbook. And you can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.